But the point here is that they have taken feminist understanding, feminist terminology, feminist language, and switched it around. That's why we recognize so many of the things they're saying, but they come in the wrong order. That's why when we talked about things like, you know, social constructs, or breaking down the norms, or, you know, down with gender, we hear the same things, but in the wrong order. So what's really happening here, in the second layer of the theory, is the re-establishing of stereotypes, but now as the basis for the definition of sex. Right? So let's go on. So now in the first layer it was all about diversity, tolerance, and the second layer it's about, you know, blue or pink, cars or dolls. Now comes something interesting in the third layer, which is when we're going to apply this theory. Lots of states have, you know, just in the past 10 years, at an amazing speed, changed laws around sex and gender identity. So all of a sudden, in a lot of countries, now anybody who wants to can go and identify as a man or woman without any surgical or medical intervention and get that recognized in law, in the passport, right? So just think about how long it took for women to get the right to vote, you know, or to get the right to anything. How long it took for gay people to get the right even not to be considered, you know, criminals. And how fast this has happened, you know? And now when we're going to apply this theory, and we see here that any man now can identify as a woman, right? We're seeing that, for example, in female sports, men are entering female sports, often winning. A mediocre man who is at place like 400 something in swimming and nobody would know his name as a man, we wouldn't even know who that person was, can go into women's swimming and win. Same in cycling, same in boxing, same in weightlifting. All of these mediocre males who we didn't even know about, all of a sudden are winning in women's sports. We're seeing that men who commit very typical male crimes, such as rape, abuse of women, child pornography, all of a sudden are identifying as women and getting put into women's prisons and being treated as women by the media. And I want to read to you a case which is very typical of how this is working structurally. Okay, so in December 2018, in Sweden there was a lot of media speaking about a woman who was convicted of child pornography possession. So she had like 13,600 images and videos of children being raped, and it was like extremely violent child pornography. So the prosecutor was interviewed and commented on that it's really unusual for a woman to commit this kind of crime, but here we have an example and it shows that women are also doing this and it's not just a male thing. On the internet, on forums, a lot of men were saying like, who is this interesting woman? We want to meet her. And it turned out, of course, that this individual was in fact a man. He was even registered as a man at the time that the crime was committed. And this the media did not say. I had to find like some Russian sensational tabloid who was investigating the case to figure out. I was calling the tax authorities to ask if he changed the sex. I had to call 3 times. The first 2 times they said, oh, this is sensitive, we're not going to tell you. And the 3rd time I got somebody else on the line and they did tell me that this was a man at the time of committing the crime. And this man not only was a man who was downloading child pornography, it was a man who was, even if you apply stereotypes, a very typical kind of man. So he was a military, he had a career in the armed forces, he was a far-right nationalist. I mean, he had a lot of characteristics that, you know, if you would apply stereotypes and say, what is a man, what is a woman, you would say, that's a man. All of these characteristics typically male. Now, he said he's a woman, so he is a woman, right? How does that apply to the old idea in the book of jazz that I like pink, so I'm a girl, I like dolls, I'm a girl? All of a sudden that layer is also gone. In the third layer, we understand that in reality, when this theory is applied to reality, sex is a man's domain. So men can decide what sex they are and what sex we are. Can we do the same thing? Can I say, oh, I'm a man and I get treated as a man? Now here comes the asymmetry. If I'm going to decide that I'm a man and compete in men's sports, first of all, I'm not going to win, I'm not going to get anywhere, and we all know that, right? Second of all, if I try to take testosterone, that will be doping, and that will be illegal. So whereas men have a chance to get into women's sports, we don't have a chance to get into their sports. How about prisons? Everybody's talking about trans women in prisons. Why is nobody talking about trans men in male prisons? Because nobody wants to go there. Of course, why would they want to go? And this is the interesting difference between a woman identifying as a man and a man identifying as a woman. Now, if I identify as a man, I can get the passport maybe, but it doesn't help because men are not going to treat me as a man anyway. So if I go to a man's prison or a man's changing room and I say, oh, don't sexually harass me because I'm actually a man, we all know that nobody's going to care. We all know that they're going to say, we don't care, you look like a woman and you're a woman to me, so I'm going to go ahead, right? If I change my sex to a man, does that mean that I get to be prime minister, that I get to have a male salary, that I get a male job? I was trying to find that out. And it turned out that during the whole year of 2020, I found lots of examples of the first transgender politician in all the world. All of them were trans women. Not one of them was a trans man. So to change sex for a woman into a man doesn't seem to get her into the man's club. It doesn't seem to get her male privilege. It doesn't seem to get her anywhere. Most of the articles about trans men were about a trans man being pregnant or a trans man having her period, which is very typical female things. But they weren't about trans men succeeding anywhere, about trans men, breaking barriers, right? So this is all very interesting. Most articles of marriages, when it came to somebody transitioning late in life, were about men, married men who had kids, transitioning to become female, and had a wife who supported her in her journey. Now, was there any example of a woman transitioning to becoming a man and having her boyfriend supporting him and now deciding that he's gay because, of course, if she's now a man, I'm gay? Not a single example what I found. So we see that there's an asymmetry here. What ends up becoming is that we end up getting a structure where we have open female spaces and closed male spaces. So this is the end result of this theory. Maybe as feminists, we could have accepted this if it turned out to mean more opportunities for women. If it meant really that nobody knew who was a woman and who was a man and we could just make it in the man's world because nobody could say who was who, it doesn't seem that that's happening. It seems that what's happening is our spaces are being opened, our sports, our shelters, our organizations, our prisons, our changing rooms, everything that's female is being opened, whereas the male category keeps on being closed. And why is that? Because what protects the female category are laws and rules and names, whereas what protects the male category is power, informal networks, and violence, right? And nobody seems to be interested in changing that. The whole debate around trans people is about trans women's access to women's things, not about trans men's access to men's things. When they speak about trans inclusion in sports, do they ever speak about how it's going to be for trans men in male sports? Do they ever say, we need a quota here, we need to make it so that everybody on Barça, on Inter, on PSG are going to have like 2 trans men on the team? Just imagine if we suggested that. We want trans-included sports, so we want all the different football teams to have a quota for trans men. They would never accept that. So all the discussion is about how trans women are going to be included in women's. All the question is, what is a woman? Nobody's talking about what is a man. Nobody's questioning the category of man. Nobody's questioning men. When we are speaking, for example, of prisons, right? We had a case in Sweden. It was a guy called Christopher Johansson, I think, he killed his ex-girlfriend, who was from Thailand, and he cut her into pieces and hid her in the forest. And after that, he pretended he didn't know where she was, and he was searching for her, right? Somebody's falling asleep for her. I'm not going to take it as an insult. So he was convicted. He was put into a male's prison. In prison, he changed and he said, "I'm now a woman." We don't have evidence that he actually had an operation or anything. Maybe he took some hormones, but that was it, we think, from the reports we have. He was transferred to a female prison. Now, in the debate around that, we're told that trans women are at risk in males' prisons for rape, abuse, and so on, so they need to come to female prisons. Nobody is debating the fact, is challenging the fact that males are violent in the male's prison, right? Nobody's saying, well, men, you gotta stop being violent. You gotta stop this. Nobody is saying to the men, you can't be beating up women or trans people, stop that. Nobody's even asking them to be tolerant. So this tolerance is only being asked of women. Now, if he's moved to a female prison and the female inmates complain, they are told they should be tolerant, they should accept him. If they protest, that's literal violence, and it could kill people, right? So male violence is just taken for granted. That's okay. They are just like that. They can go on being that way. But if we say something, if we have an opinion, we are responsible for somebody's death, suicide, whatnot, right? So there's definitely double standards in how we're treating the issue here, right? Yeah, so I wanted to bring up some of the discrepancies in the gender identity theory. I don't know if you could actually call it a theory because it's so incoherent. When you try to follow the theoretical models, it changes all the time. For example, some of the things that are being said. That gender identity is a colonial concept. Have you heard this one? It's a colonial concept. In so many cultures back in the days, they didn't have binary gender. Okay, first of all, sex and gender are two different things. Sex, as long as human beings have existed, has always been a fact. Cultures did know how to make babies before colonialization, obviously, otherwise they wouldn't be here, right? There might have been different concepts of gender, but mind you, patriarchy is 6,000 years old. And it's basically worldwide. There have been examples of some cultures that have survived in a matrilinear or maybe even more equal state, but generally worldwide we've had patriarchy for 6,000 years. It predates colonialism. So most of the religions, most of the structures are very patriarchal in the world, right? Usually those other concepts of gender refer to homosexuality, especially among males, as a way to internalize the unaccepted. They do not refer to fluid gender. It wasn't like nobody knew what gender was until colonialism came, right? One other interesting topic that we always hear in online debates, especially, trans women are women. Okay, so according to this theory, trans doesn't exist, right? This is like, I think, the main contradiction of gender identity theory. If trans women are women, then they're not trans women, and then trans doesn't exist, right? So, because then it's just women are women, right? So, also, if trans women are women then automatically trans women? No. And that is the interesting thing, right? So there is something called a trans woman who gets to have their own identity, their own oppression, their own groups, their own discussions, where we're told we don't know what it feels like, so we can't go there. But they can also be in our group and they know how we feel, because they're the same as us, but we're not the same as them, right? How symmetrical is that? You know, and then we're told if we say, no, we don't believe that trans women are women, because the trans, in the trans woman, what does that mean? What means trans? It means you were born a male, so that means something, right? If it means something to you, it means something to me, right? It can't just mean something to you and nothing to me, right? So then they say, no, because you can't just reduce women to biology. Have you heard that one? You can't reduce women to biology because women is so much more than that. Okay, so what about their term cis woman? What does that mean? What does cis woman mean? What is that group cis women? It's the exact same group as the one we mean when we say women. It's the biological women, right? So they do base something on biology. They do have a word for us and our biology. It's just that it's called cis woman, but it's the exact same group. So why have a new word? Well, this is the interesting thing, and I think this is where it comes to like the whole, what is the point of renaming us, right? Because women, for the longest time, right? When I looked up, at the end of my book, I write that if you look up woman in historical archives, you know, from the Bible and onwards, you see that woman is something that is described by men. And it's something that they don't like very much, that they don't respect very much. You know, in the Old Testament, she appears as a support and as a comfort to man. She's called woman because she was taken out of man, it says. She's erased from history in the Old Testament in long lists where it's said that men begat their sons on their own. Abraham begat Isaac, Isaac begat Jacob, Jacob begat Judas. No mention of the women who actually gave birth to these people. In the Indian Rig Veda, it's stated that woman's intellect has little weight. And also that hearts of hyenas are the hearts of women. For Aristotle, woman is a deformed man. For Martin Luther, she's a creature who ought to keep seated because she has wide hips. You know, the socialists and anarchists are not better. For Proudhon, the anarchist, she's so inferior to the man that she's worth 8 out of 27. I don't know how you came to that number. So it's very kind of disheartening to search for women in old historical texts, right? But then, you know, at the end of the 18th century, something happens. Women start to reclaim the word woman, right? So women are starting to organize. Women are starting to organize for their rights, to be heard, to be included in democracy. You had the first international conference in 1878 by French women. And men also joined the cause, and so the word woman begins to change. So at the beginning of the 20th century, the word woman, if you search in historical texts, it often appears related to the women's votes movement, the suffragists, right? And what then happens is, if you look at it from a power relationship, you see that the word woman used to be the tool of patriarchy. And women took that word, and we said, now this word is ours. This word has a different meaning. It doesn't mean an inferior, incomplete human being with no intellect. Woman means an oppressed subject with the right to revolt. That's what woman means. So the word woman now is our tool. We own this word. This word has power, right? And woman had thus, to speak in Marxist terms, become a group that does not merely exist in itself, but for itself. It means that women up until then, we had shared and common conditions, but we weren't aware of them. Now we were aware. We had class consciousness as women. We knew that we were women. We knew that we were oppressed. We knew that it was unfair. We knew that men were oppressing us and that we had the right to do something about it. So at the end of last century, around 20 years ago, it seemed that there was very little that patriarchy could do because we had all the tools, we had the weapons directed upwards, so they couldn't press us down. Now what happens to a tool or a weapon when it's not useful? You throw it away. So, from the viewpoint of patriarchy, woman is no longer a useful tool. So, let's get rid of it. Because woman is our word, so they don't need it anymore. So instead, what is being done now is, it's not coming from above. It's coming from what it looks like below. We were not prepared. We didn't know it was going to come from below. We were always looking above, you know, to the big conservative patriarchy that was oppressing us. But now it's coming from here, and we were not ready. So they're not saying, you are inferior, you should sit down and shut up. They're saying, we are more oppressed than you. You have to listen to us. Of course, you know, I don't want to be an oppressor. So it was our weak spot. So what is being done with this word woman is, it's being fragmented, it's being picked apart, it's being chopped into pieces, it's being reduced to body parts, menstruator, cervix haver, uterus bearer, you know, whatnot. It's made to include its opposite. So woman now also means trans woman, which means man, so it means both. So, you know, it doesn't mean anything really. It's added prefixes like cis woman. It's being labeled problematic. The ones who use this word are being defamed and boycotted. So there is this war against the word woman, which is in no way waged against the word man. The word man is being left completely alone. Now, in whose interest is it that there is a war against this word woman? Is it in our interest? No, because this word was ours. We had reclaimed it, we had it, we knew what it meant. So when we are being told that we should change this word for cis women, now what does cis woman mean? I have a chapter of this cis woman. Okay, so before we used to be women, which meant an oppressed class with the right to revolt. Now we're being told we should now call ourselves cis women. If you look at official definitions, for example, the Swedish Secretariat for Gender Research, it says that a central feature of the position of a cis person is that it's often associated with cultural conceptions of normal, natural, and healthy, and is a position which entails many privileges. Ah! So instead of becoming oppressed, now we are privileged. Do you understand? So how are we going to organize now? How are we going to organize as women? And I think that's the main thing, and that's why this question is so important now. Because if we organize as women, we're told you must include trans women and their perspectives, which means we must include men, which means that women and men should fight together, which means we cannot have our separate understanding of our own sex and our own situation and our own problems, right? If we are told we should organize as cis women, it sounds like we're a bunch of millionaires. It sounds like it's, you know, Bill Gates and George Soros hanging around in a club. You know, yeah, cis women are now on the street fighting. I mean, what is that? Really? And so, they are saying, yeah, women are oppressed, but the most oppressed woman is the trans woman, meaning the man. Right? So the most oppressed woman is a man, and the woman who's a woman is privileged. Right? So it turned everything around. And it's coming from below. We didn't expect it from there, so we don't have the defense. We have to reorganize, we have to regroup, we have to have new language to defend ourselves from this type of attempt to undermine the women's movement. Because if we don't have the word woman, how can we have a woman's consciousness, a woman's movement, speak about women's issues? It's very clear that all the questions where we have fought as women, for example, you know, the right to talk about menstruation and taboo, are exactly the issues where we're told we should not speak about women. So I think it's very clear when we hear nowadays the question about menstruation. Then we hear, oh, all genders are menstruating. Oh, I have a great example of that actually. From Tampax, I think. Of course. Okay, so Tampax in 2020 they said, we're going to stop using the word woman, and we're going to speak about people who bleed. So, they declared, fact. That's also interesting, they always say like fact, like it's not an opinion, like fact. Fact, not all women have periods. Yeah, we know that. Also a fact, not all people with periods are women. Let's celebrate the diversity of all people who bleed. Okay, great. And then, a couple of weeks later, they have another Instagram post which said, people with periods can do everything men can do, but do it better, and while bleeding. Okay, wait. So you have people with periods on one hand, on the other hand you have men. So there is one person that's unnameable, unspeakable, you cannot say who this person is, but it's the opposite of the word man, which you can say, which is a sex, and the one who you cannot say is the one who bleeds. So really now, is this about celebrating diversity, or is it about erasing the word woman? Right? Because the word man is obviously not being erased. Right? Another debate where this is happening, the same female erasure, is the debate around abortion. We have lost battles around abortion in Poland and in the US, and I think partly because the organizations that were going to fight for women's rights to abort didn't dare to use the word woman. So if you can't even name the subject that's oppressed, how the hell can you fight for us? So instead of having people standing up and saying, this is a war on women, this is a war on 52% of the population, and we're not going to accept this, you have spokespeople standing up and saying, not only women need abortions, people of all genders need abortions, and it targets LGBTQ, people of color, and so on and so forth, without mentioning the big group that actually needs abortions. So if you can't name us, you can't fight for us. I don't think it's a coincidence that we're losing these battles at the exact same time as we can't name the group that we're talking about. And I think this is the end result of all this. We're going to keep on losing battles. We're going to lose the battles we already won because we can't name us. So instead of speaking out, we're going to have this muddled type of language where it's like, we're talking about a group, but we don't really know which group it is, but anyway, like the people that need this are in danger. You're not going to win a battle like that. It's like as if Black Lives Matter couldn't say black. Lives matter. Right? It's like, we don't say that it's about skin color, it's just about, yeah, whatever who you want to identify with, anyway, those lives matter. Of course that wouldn't work. You have to know who you are. If you're oppressed, you have to name yourself. And that's another chapter that I have that's really interesting. Why is it only women that are being erased in this sense, right? Why is it only the subject of sex that's going into postmodern times?